Welcome everybody. I'm super pleased to have this time with Dr. Everett from Pepperdine University because this is going to be some programming that we don't do a lot of, right? You've probably seen a lot of invites from me about fundraising and angel investors and venture capitalists and how to improve your pitch and how to, get in front of investors. But there's a whole ecosystem of resources that we talk about in those things, but we're not experts about that. I'm an expert in your when you grant stock to yourself, why you should file an 83B election, or how you should put a vesting schedule, on you and your co-founder's stock grant, or what angel investors are looking for when they're talking to your company. But the education ecosystem has so many resources, and we talk a little bit about this when people are asking like, "Hey, I'm pre-revenue." I'm pre-seed, how do I convince investors to give me money? And a lot of times the answer is if you don't have anything done, you probably can't, unless you already know them, right? If you already have an uncle or an aunt or a former business colleague or whatnot who's like, hey, I'm going to bet on you and I'll give you a little money to see how this works out. What are your options next? So bootstrapping is always, the first thing we lean on. It's like, hey, can you get customers without raising funds? But there are a ton of resources out there, and that's why we've brought in Dr. Everett today. Um, Full disclosure, Pepperdine University runs the Most Fundable Companies program, which I will actually throw the link. They have an application open on Gust right now, something that we promote every year. We think it's a fantastic program because you effectively get somebody in your corner if you get selected. How many companies do you usually select, Craig?
So we usually have, well, uh, between 2 and 3 thousand come in, in
Yeah.
the top of the funnel, and we select as winners, 15 to 20.
Okay.
And so it's a competition, but it's more of like a light due diligence competition rather than a pitch competition.
Right.
And so so yeah, the very few win. And again, there's I consider probably everybody from the semifinals on is I would consider meeting the bar for fundability. It's like those they're fundable, but what we're trying to pick are the most fundable companies. So a lot of
As
people who
the
are
name says.
a lot of people who are disappointed, that they weren't winners. It's like, yeah, but you made it to the semifinals, and we provide our semifinalist list to all our investors who we participate with as well. So it's not just the winners, but the winners get to come to the showcase and get all the press and all the media and such. But we still pass along the names and contacts of all of our semifinalists, finalists and winners to our investors.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get at. It's like you guys support companies way it's not like Shark Tank where it's like, do you get a deal or not? It's more like, hey, do you get a relationship? And I believe your relationship lasts, you know,
But, and even
months, if not years.
I think the stats are even on Shark Tank, like only 50% of the ones who get that handshake deal on the show actually end up getting the funding.
Yeah.
So it's like they drop out during the due diligence process. So a deal on Shark Tank doesn't mean an actual deal.
Yeah, more good media, not exactly good business. But before we dive into the details of that, tell me a little bit about your background, your relationship with Pepperdine, and the program that you run, and then I will start pepperdining you with questions.
Thank you. So my background, I've been at Pepperdine for about, let's see, 15 years. This is my 16th year. Um, I was in industry. I was at Accenture and a couple of startups and Northrop Grumman for many years. And I went back and did my PhD in finance at Purdue, and then went to the academic route because I wasn't. It was being a professor was going to be a lot more flexible. I was going to be able to see more of my family, and so I have 5 kids, so I wanted to see more
Oh
of my
wow.
family, and so it's yeah, the whole academic thing is a nice flexible lifestyle. I got to get to go to my kids' games and stuff, and as long as you get your work done, it doesn't matter when you do it. So, but a lot of people have that. there's a lot more remote work and a lot more flexible work now than there was back then. So it's not just academia that gives you that flexibility anymore. But so yeah, I've been at Pepperdine for 15 years. I teach corporate finance, entrepreneurial finance, business valuation, even film and television finance occasionally. So
Oh, very cool.
that's what I do.
Wonderful. We have more intersections than I thought. I worked at Boeing when I got my startup.
Oh,
My
nice.
first job out of college was defense intelligence,
Hmm.
software engineering work in Boeing. And so
Yeah,
Northrop was somebody that we'd meet at conferences down in Dotus and things like that.
yeah, it's pretty much yeah, us and Lockheed and Boeing
Yeah, yeah, we're all
pretty much
just
we're all of the primes kind of like competing against each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love it, and it's that's an interesting perspective, or that is a shared perspective, which is wow, how things are different, right? When previously, like the idea of like five kids, well, congratulations, but also like raising them, it's like now I can see a founder with five kids, working from home and coordinating a remote team and still doing it, but 10, 15 years ago, it would be like, no, you have to be in a metropolitan area. You have to, be in the office all the time. Like there's no room for that. But times have changed. But tell me a bit more about what from your experience being in academia, what is the best way that academia and these programs can actually support entrepreneurs, regardless of whether they're in the school or not, whether they're in the academic space or not. I know there's a lot more that people don't actually aren't actually aware of, but that they could tap into to help with their entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah, so yeah, some universities really give a lot of preference to their own students and alumni, and for their programs, and others are don't care about that. Like for example, Pepperdine. If you live in the community and such, they'll help you out because a lot of times they're engaging students and such in these programs. For example, Pepperdine's law school, the Crusoe Law School, has a startup law clinic where that's run out of the law school. It's open to anybody. And so, if you need help with your startup, either doing the organizational documents, intellectual property, doing your like employment agreements or stock agreements or that sort of thing, it's geared toward helping any startup going through the legal stuff that they have to go through, and it's supervised by professors, but it's law students that are doing the actual helping out with the startups and such, and that's open to anybody. And a lot of universities, it's the same deal. Some of their programs aren't just for their own students. Even incubator programs aren't necessarily for their own students and alumni and such. You just, you apply, and if you get in, if they think you're interesting, you can do that. Um, One of the things that and most universities at this point, Pepperdine included, have a maker space, which is
Oh, interesting.
for doing stuff. A lot of those are limited to students. They're especially geared towards students, but also allow alumni and and sometimes even community members. You just have to check and ask if it's being unutilized. The director would say, "Hey, sure, come on in."
Right.
Because most universities are nonprofit, and most nonprofits are organized in order to benefit the community. That's their charter. So, yeah, if it's a university that's not a nonprofit, yeah, they might have a problem with that. But a lot of universities are, and so they feel like if they can, they'll help anybody. It doesn't matter if you're affiliated with their community or not. Now, that's not a blanket statement. There's a capacity issue. Yeah, if they're booked up, they're going to prioritize. They're going to prioritize their own affiliated people over outsiders. But if they're not booked up, it's like, yeah, they've got a charter to help the community. They have a mandate.
So if I'm we run into this a lot in our I'm happy to say that a lot of the founder support networks that we run tend to be wonderfully distributed. Mostly across the United States. We have some international clients or international folks as well. But I'm familiar with the coasts. I live right outside of New York. You're probably familiar with the Valley in terms of entrepreneurship. But so if I'm a founder and I want to, I see this a lot where founders are, they're on their Zoom webcam and they're like, I'm trying to get customers, I'm trying to get investors, I'm trying to get new partners. What what can they tap into in their community to find these kind of resources? Because like Pepperdine's one, right? We'll give you guys the link and the full credit. But what would you suggest founders like that uh, do in order to find where these resources are at and what they can expect is available?
So, um, I think the way I'll answer that question. So with our most fundable companies competition, just like a segue into that,
Do it.
what we're trying to identify and is what most investors are trying to identify in a startup, where to find out where to put their money. So if you're a founder and you're looking for investment, what do you need? What do you need to show? And so most founders think all I have to show is I have this great idea, and that's not the case. Yeah, because it's really difficult. I mean, even investors have a lot of difficulty identifying a or distinguishing between a good idea and a bad idea. It's like sometimes ideas sound really good, but it doesn't work out. So it's not really the idea. It has to make sense, yes, but it's traction. And I look at traction in a very, very broad way. So the 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 most clear one is revenue traction. It's like, is do you
Yeah.
have customers and are you growing? That's the simplest case. Um, but investors and we in our competition can take a broader view of that. Now, it is the case that in the current venture environment, revenue is a lot more important than it was, say, 10 years ago. But
Even 4 years ago.
even for
2021 was a wild time.
yeah. So there's other forms of traction. Basically, what we're looking at is, have you, as a founder, been able to convince other people to get on board with you? And so the clearest example is a customer. So if you have you been able to sell your product or service to customers, yeah, that's great. But okay, if you haven't done that yet, if you're pre-revenue, have you at least been able to sell your idea or sell your concept uh, to board members or board of advisors? Have you been
Or a
able to bring,
co-founder.
yeah, or a co-founder? Have you been able to bring on board, convinced this co-founder to come on board? Have you been able to convince an impressive board of advisors to come on board? Because at least then you sold your idea and your concept and your business plan to those people. So that is, in my opinion, a form of traction. Have you been able to sell your idea to the patent and trademark office? And so I mean, there's a lot of, I don't think patents are the end all be all. In fact, a lot of
Especially
investors and a
software
lot,
companies.
yeah, it's not, don't have patents, or you just say no, we have trade secrets instead. Well, in my experience with investors, you have to have both, because yeah, trade secrets are actually more defensible in a sense than patents, because patent, it's out there for anybody to look at, and they can then tweak it or whatever.
Yeah,
But what
especially other countries can reproduce it and ignore our laws
but
entirely.
but what a patent shows is that you've been able to go through that excruciating process and finish it, and you have an idea that you've been able to secure in that way. Um, the So in the same sense, uh, you've proven yourself that you can actually see something through, and I think that's one of the big values of college degrees. Still, is that okay? You show investors, and again, our data and our research shows that it's much easier to get funding if you have at least one college degree. Why? Because you've shown at least that you can finish what you started. And so maybe you haven't didn't learn anything in that college degree that's at all relevant to your startup, but at least you've shown investors that yeah, you can start this thing that's kind of hard to do and see it through and finish and not quit, which that's what they want. And when they invest in somebody, they don't want to see somebody who's going to like bail on them or like lose interest or not be able to see it through. And college degrees show that. They show that you can stick to something and finish it. So what am I getting around to here on traction? So yeah, being able to show at least that you've been able to sell your idea, sell yourself to other people in some way really helps. Now, the university connection with that is if that you get involved with any sort of university program, any startup incubator, even an alumni group or whatever. It's exposure to broaden your network, and potentially get advisors, maybe somebody with with a PhD behind their name or something, on board, because having an impressive board of advisors and people affiliated with your venture is a help to showing some credibility to investors.
No, I love that. And that is we haven't had time to talk at length, but you're clearly speaking the same language that we do when we help out the startup community. And I love that you brought up traction because that's the number one thing we preach when every founder is they tend to ask questions in five different dimensions. How do I find investors? Is my pitch deck really good? How much money should I raise? What's my valuation? It's like all those things don't matter. Like the most important thing is to actually build traction within your company. And that university adjacency is like I find a lot of people they're kind of like grasping at air when it's like, well, how do I do that? And it's like, well, it depends on your industry, right? If you're CPG as opposed to enterprise as opposed to whatever, but like, how do you expand your network? And it sounds like universities have a fertile ground to expand your network, not just in terms of advisors, but in terms of programs. Do you want to say a little bit about what the most fundable companies program is and like why you guys even do it?
Sure. The it's a startup competition. It's arguably the largest one in the U.S.
Far as I
Although
can tell.
it's hard to tell because a lot of we actually publish our numbers of how many people participate and such, but a lot of other competitions don't, and so we're not sure. But we think it may be the largest one. And so yeah, basically a lot of companies come in the door. We go through a screening process. You do a survey, which is fairly extensive. The and Which is our quarterfinals, the extensive one, and that's mostly because we're dealing with thousands of companies, mostly algorithmic, and the weighting that we place on answers and such is research based, based on funding success of prior competition entrants. And so we track who gets funded, who doesn't get funded, and how their answers compare and what the relationship is between how they answered these questions as a startup and whether they got funded or not. And then we adjust the weightings of our questions accordingly. So then once we get to that, once we cut it down to the semifinalists, that's when we bring in our panels of judges and such. So that's when realize, and even in the quarterfinals, you get a feedback report based on our algorithms and such on where your weaknesses were, and so it's actually a good thing to do, even if you're not really, think you're ready to win the
Yeah.
competition.
Everybody
Uh,
should apply.
Everybody should
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody should apply because you do get a feedback report saying, okay, investors are looking for this stuff, and then here's your weaknesses. Because again, a lot of founders think all I have to do is have this great idea, and investors will be running to invest, and that's not the case. They are looking for certain things, and if you're lacking that, our process actually shows you where those weaknesses are. A lot of times, our winners have participated 2 or 3 years in our competition, and they finally, they finally got it all together, and so So then go through the semifinals, and that's a little bit more qualitative that survey rather than quantitative, and because actual judges are looking at it and evaluating. And we have let's see, I think we have about 60 judges now, and so
Oh wow.
and they're broken down by industry, so they're experts, and usually at least two judges are looking at each application and such, and then we cut it down to about a somewhere between 70 and 100 semifinalists. Then we cut that down to about 30 finalists, and then, like I said, we have then 15 to 20 winners from that. And the 15 to 20 winners come to our Malibu campus, in the fall. We do a showcase event that has investors there, and so it's not really a pitch competition. You are pitching at that point, but you're pitching to investors, and you've already won, and everybody knows that they've already won at that point. And it's really just a like a demo day type thing at that point to investors. So that's and then we publish the results. Traditionally, we've always published in Entrepreneur Magazine. Partnered with them on that,
Oh
and
yeah.
then plus with all the press releases, and then you get a lot of media attention and that sort of thing. So that's the most vulnerable companies competition. Now, one thing that's happened at Pepperdine recently. So we've always had this thing in the MBA program called the E2B program, Education to Business, where our the MBA students that sign up for this E2B program go out and kind of do a consulting engagement with with a with a business, and then they come back and work as a group and come up with recommendations for that business and go out. Now, one thing we've started in recent years, and that's actually been really successful, is that we choose E2B companies from our winners list, and sometimes even semifinalists. It just depends on what what the business is doing and such. But so you have MBA students coming into your startup and doing this analysis and such, and making recommendations, and a lot of the startups have found this extremely useful. And so I there are probably other universities that do this as well, but those are the type of programs where you have now a lot of founders don't like feedback, and if you're one of those, that's going to be a problem
Yeah.
because you're going to go into conflict with investors if you don't like feedback. But if you're somebody who does like feedback and does like suggestions and something from outside the box, so a lot of universities will have these type programs where their business students will come in, and so it's again, it's not going to be like McKinsey coming in and telling you what to do, but it's going to be at least some people, a group of people that are at least kind of learning a lot of the stuff that you may need to know, and making recommendations. So I know we do that, and again, that's a thing that you can leverage for free from us or other universities. I'm sure do the same sort of thing.
I think that's a very fascinating resource that a lot I like that you say that. A lot of founders don't like feedback, right? Because they have a vision of the world that is like the world is going to be like this, and anybody who refuses, to acknowledge my vision is, not the visionary that I am. But what we have seen over and over and over is like you know, the reason why, to your previous point, traction is so necessary is because you've proven that you can build something people want, right? You can tap into a need that, people care about. As much as you can, labor away, in your garage, on the super whatever that you think, the whole world is going to love, in reality, almost every business story is not actually that. It's like I like the old quote of like the best laid plans go out the window at first sight of the enemy, which is like, yes, as soon as you try to like deploy it, you get the feedback. And I think a lot of founders would strongly benefit. Honestly, bringing McKinsey into a pre-seed startup is worthless, right? They've got their HBR MBAs. They come in, they can do market analysis for hours, but like there's no data within the company to actually add to, the research that isn't already available, right? There's tons of reports out there. But being
Yeah,
able to have, yeah, an individual say, hey, it sounds like these kind of relationships are almost like, well, I'll partner up with you and help you out. Like, oh, it's good for me, it's good for you, it's good for everybody.
Yeah, this is something actually that Stanford does really well. Like in the Stanford Technology Ventures program, which, yeah, has had lots of unicorns coming out of there. I mean, Stanford itself is what,
Yeah,
like almost 200 unicorns. Stanford, yeah, I think it's
yeah,
187 or something,
yeah.
the last
That
count.
tree's done
But
some work.
but but they're ascribed. In fact, it was developed there with the lean approach, the lean launchpad and such. And so one of the key aspects of lean is the customer development. And this is talking about feedback, where and what the founder, working in his garage, head down, got this great idea that everybody's going to love. One thing that those people aren't doing is the customer development, where you're actually talking to customers the entire time you're in development. And so that you can figure out, um, if you need to pivot before your offering fails
Yep.
and doesn't get any traction. So that feedback from outside, that's part of the loop, and that's part of it for actually a successful startup. If you're not talking to your customers, your
Or
potential
potential
customers,
customers. Yeah.
your potential customers from the get-go, you're probably making some mistakes. And again, working inside a university ecosystem will also give you that same approach. You may identify pivot requirements a lot earlier if you're working within a university ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll have some time for some questions here, and we've already got some of the Q&A in the chat. But Dan Braun brings up in the we actually run Craig, I haven't told you about this, but we run a program called Countdown that we do on kind of a maybe like a 6 weekly basis about customer development because so many founders spend so much time building and scheming and potentially fundraising and pitch deck polishing when in reality they need to be talking to customers before they do anything like that. And one of the bigger questions we've had from members in that program and members in our other lighter touch communities is like, well, like how do I get involved in that? And we give kind of like general advice. It's like go to meetups, go to conferences, go to, local events, go to where, I'm pretty sure there's, a co-working area that's targeted towards that. But I think the one area where universities can really stand up, and based on what you've just been sharing, is like I mean, just what you've said. It almost sounds like it's just applying to the most fundable companies program will expose you to, potential opportunities for collaboration. But I'm imagining most universities around the United States, at least, have some ability to kind of tap into their local ecosystem. And they probably have roots, that are deeper than your living room. Um, and
Yeah,
that's wonderful to hear.
yeah. One of the in most fundable companies, I noticed we have well, I mentioned that we have a lot of judges, and most of them are a lot of them anyway are they're either industry experts or investors or both and such. And so, we always ask the question, at least at the semifinal stage of our judges, especially if the judge is recommending that the company advance. We ask the question, so would you invest in this company?
Yeah.
Would you write a check? And that's kind of an important touch point. It's like, okay, yeah, this is a great company, but how excited are you about them? And we definitely have had many judges that have invested in the
Oh
companies
yeah.
that they're judging. So yeah, so that's definitely a thing. So yeah, so what were you saying?
I no, I agree with you completely. And it's really getting yourself out there because we have seen, we run our own angel group and we have seen companies pitch where it's like, oh, the group doesn't invest, but one person's like, hey, I really love this. Let's keep going. Oh, the group's not into it. Fine. We've done what's often called syndication in the space, where it's like we talk to other groups, and it's like a company comes in, and then we find out that they just casually mention like, oh, I've also applied to this group that you might know about, and we're like, oh, we we know about them intimately, but you just didn't get through their screening process. But four people showed interest. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, well, we're investing, so like bring them into our circle. So it's really just, like getting the signal out there as much as you can. And I think a university ecosystem is really good for that. All right, I want to get to some we actually have a ton of questions coming in. So Christopher Brace asks, but sorry, before I go on, Craig, is there anything else you want to share about just generally the program or kind of the university ecosystem before we get into the specific questions?
No, no, let's go.
Let's go. So this is a good one. Christopher Brace asks, he has a specific university researcher in mind, researchers to collaborate with. What's the best way to reach out to them?
Wow. That's that's a tough question because usually, um, just cold outreach doesn't work all that well because
Yeah,
you know, I I get a lot of stuff in my inbox from founders and such, and saying it's like, oh yeah, I got this great idea. It's like,
same.
can you introduce me to investors or or whatever, and
Yeah,
or you want to collaborate and and my response is usually, well, we have the most fundable companies competition. That's how we decide who to introduce to investors. So just just participate in that one because yeah, that's how I make my decision about who I want to introduce to investors is if you go through the competition and do well. And likewise for collaboration, it's the same thing. Most people who have especially a hot expertise are getting a lot of solicitation. So you really do need to kind of be introduced by by somebody that they trust because they're probably getting a lot of cold solicitations as well.
yeah. And honestly, and I will generalize that to the point of almost everything when it comes to getting the word out and trying to get, you know, to get an introduction to somebody you don't already know. I use the term strangels, which is stranger angels. If you're trying to raise from stranger angels, like you need to already have, an offering, available to them. Because if you do not have a pre-existing relationship, all you're doing is making an offering. And I think that that goes with anything, even if it's just, oh, I want to work with a professor at this university. Oh, I want to work with a research scientist over here. But I think these are the programs. It's we the internet has created so much access that we have put barriers up immediately, right? It's like most fundable companies, right? It's because you can't talk to every single company that would like to be considered. So you have to have a structured, gatekeeping process. Not using gatekeeping in the way of a negative thing, but it's like it's just necessary to, uh, give people the time to evaluate the things that are worth pursuing. The same reason why angels join angel groups. Like a lot of people ask me all the time, it's like, how do I get access to these angels? Like I heard I can get a list of like 500 angels to email. It's like, good luck. You can. I'm sure somebody will send you to that and you'll send them an email and you'll get lame ass, open rates and, no responses. Because like,
Yep,
who
and
are you?
you'll be reported as spam. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the reason why we've set up programs like this, we being the global we, the world, is because you need to handle the noise and you need to build signal. But participating in these kind of programs is exactly the way to do it. All right, we got a good question here. All right, so we got some specific questions about the most fundable companies program. So Blake Hess here. I actually know Blake. Nice to see you, Blake. He's in the second round, and there's a big questionnaire apparently. He asks, "What advice do you have for me going forward this round and further?" So I guess just advice on going through the most fundable company program.
So
In
yeah, so that would be we call the quarterfinals. So essentially, you've been identified as legitimate, and so now we're like collecting a lot of information, and so because we've shown that there is some correlation between the answers to these questions in this big questionnaire, and funding success. So again, most fundable companies, we're not trying to identify the coolest companies or the ones that we think will succeed, because there's a lot of companies that we think are awesome and will succeed, but they're not fundable. Meaning, that these things are, yeah, they're just not something that will attract outside investment. You're going to have to bootstrap it, and you'll bootstrap it, and you'll have tremendous success, and it'll be great. But
Don't take other people's money.
yeah. So essentially, yeah, that's one thing that we have to explain to people is like, yeah, this isn't about how awesome your company is. It's how attractive you are to outside investors. And so, yeah, I mean, just be honest. It's going to take it's going to take a few hours to get through this through that questionnaire, most likely. Sometimes it's quicker than that. I would the I just try to be as be honest, be answer completely. Don't blow off questions, because one of the things that the judges don't like is that they think that you're not taking it seriously. Then that's going to be kind of, no matter how awesome your company is, it's going to it's going to be a
Dang it.
no. So yeah, so basically, take it seriously, be as complete as you possibly can, and a lot of people, as they go through that question, because these questions have essentially come from VCs, and a lot of people, a lot of VCs will look at a questionnaire. It's like, a lot of this stuff is completely irrelevant. I would never ask a question like this. Well, yeah, but some other VCs did.
Yeah.
And so not all VCs, ask the same questions, or they each have their hot points or their hot buttons. And so this is kind of a collection from experience from a lot of different venture investors and angel investors. And so yeah, some of the questions won't be super relevant or even relevant at all to your company. That's okay. The We have to ask the same questions to everybody, and so this is kind of important to state, is because we do use this data for research purposes. And even so we have to have the same data set from all the founders
All
in
right.
order to do our like regression analyses and all that sort of thing, because because missing data means the record gets dropped from statistical analysis. So that's why you may find questions that you don't think are relevant to your business. That's fine. Just answer the best you can, and go from there. So that'd be my advice.
Fantastic. That actually leads into two very related questions. Wonderful segue. Mitch asks in the chat, how do you juggle and compare vastly different kind of startups? You mentioned a little bit about you got a lot of judges, but he's thinking of like hard tech startups versus SaaS companies. Is there a framework that you have set up, which is part of your data collection and part of your analysis, or do you have like specific advisors and judges with expertise in those areas?
Yeah. So there's yes. So we do
Yes, yes,
we
yes.
yes, yes, yes. So we do have different panels of judges depending on the industry. We do we do score like pre-revenue companies and post-revenue companies in different categories. So even though you go through things like, yeah, this is already have a product on the market and such, um, yeah, don't let that scare you, because because pre-revenue companies are scored differently, and that's the case of different industries. So different industries, there's different weightings for different scores and such. So yeah, we've tried to make it as fair as possible to for any type of company, any stage of company, to go through the competition. Now, having said that, there are certain industries and such that are hotter than others, and uh, so we will, so you may see in the winners list, certain types of companies or industries getting, being more represented than others, And that's because, and this is another project that I'm involved with, the private capital markets project, where I do an annual survey, and I do survey VCs and private equity investors and angel investors and such every year, to produce this private capital markets report. And so from that, I get an idea of what venture capitalist plans are for what industries they're planning to invest in the next year. And so if we see, so we'll take more people or pass more people along through the stages of the competition that are in the industries that VCs say that they're focusing on this coming year. And so yeah, so it does. So being in one of those industries that VCs want to invest in this year does help you. And
Hmm.
yeah,
Because
and
you're
being
m more fundable.
because you're more fundable, and being in some sort of niche, you may it may be a great company and you still may be fundable, but not necessarily most fundable and such. So we take all these things into consideration, but don't let the fact that we ask a lot of questions about about your product, maybe even about your marketing and stuff, which won't be relevant to pre-revenue. Don't worry about that. If you're pre-revenue, you're scored differently.
Right. Wonderful. That actually dovetails very nicely into Lilykin's question about, and I think you've basically answered it, but maybe if you have a resource for it or something we could follow up. Do you guys publish metrics on the past winners of the MFC competition, like funds raised, valuation, growth outcomes? It sounds like you're working maybe independently through another program, but do you guys have data out there that can help future applicants?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, we don't really. Yeah, so well, definitely not anything that's granular, because we do promise and we take seriously our privacy commitment and confidentiality commitment with the founders that we.
Yeah, even
And
a couple
so
thousand is still enough to kind of like, oh, I know that company.
yeah, so we definitely don't never publish anything that might be identifiable, or inferable, um, of who the winners are, particularly, and that's particularly the case if you're in a more niche industry and such. It may be quite easy to identify you. Yeah, we don't really publish a lot of statistics out of it. We use that data internally, for my own research that I publish in papers and such. And so I'll do that. But actually publishing stats, we reincorporate them into our scoring algorithm. So yeah, no, beyond what you receive, the report that you receive from us and the feedback that you get from our judges. Um, yeah, we don't really publish a lot of stats. We do publish our funding amount, how and that's usually the total funding amount, which is,
Right.
like I said, is approaching 400 million now, but not really on a year by year basis. So I mean, that's something to think about. We'll think about publishing some stats, as long as we can do it in a way that doesn't compromise anybody's confidentiality.
And I will caveat, well, I won't caveat you particularly, but the stats in this industry are always changing because this is the primordial ooze of business development. So a lot of time, like if you follow, I forget what his name is. I think it's Mark Weber or somebody. There's a guy from Carta who posts interesting things on LinkedIn all the time about like all their Carta clients. If you look at the numbers that they're pulling from, it's like a couple thousand. So it's like if you're a statistician, it's kind of like that's that's really not enough to actually say like this is a trend or not, right? You've probably missed a huge portion of the United States and a huge portion of startups, some that have bootstrapped, some that have never used your software, some that have never raised funds, or some that raised funds through means that, just weren't tracked in that kind of ecosystem. So it is, and I think will continue to be a little dodgy in terms of stats. And I kind of think that's by design because like it's fun and it's flailing. We're kind of on the cutting edge. When you're starting a brand new company, you're trying to change something. So, you're going to have to like look at the stats that are out there, but then also realize that like you're probably trying to do something different, right? You're not opening a restaurant. You're not doing a consultancy business. You're not just, following a playbook. You're trying to make a new playbook, which usually means that the stats aren't there.
Yeah.
We got a quick one. Any specific, Craig, for you, any specific universities come to mind about ed tech and e-learning outside of
Hmm.
Pepperdine?
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, not offhand. I don't really only really know internally in Pepperdine what we've done, in recent years and such, and we've made a lot of a lot of changes, a lot of developments, a lot of evolution in our e-learning platform. Because now I teach in the MBA program, so I don't know that much about undergrad and such, but I know from a market perspective, it seems like increasingly the most popular format e-learning is a hybrid format. So it's where you have some in person and then some online classes, and it's not necessarily like every other week or whatever, but people still get one of the key benefits of an MBA is the networking, and that's just not as effective when you're in an online program. That's just the fact. When you're face to face, when you're with people, you're with them on breaks and you're having conversations, in the hallway. That is a key part of an MBA experience. And so with a strictly online MBA, yeah, you get some of that through your groups and such, that you still have group and group work, and you do get some networking. But yeah, the in-person experience is really important. So we found that students will often opt for, even if they can do a course completely online, or they could be in person, they'll choose the hybrid because it's a little bit more flexible. They don't have to attend class all the time, but they still get that in-person networking experience, which is an important part of the MBA. So yeah, that's probably the big thing in e-learning. I mean, the platform we use Canvas, which almost everybody's used Canvas at some point,
Yeah.
whether it's in high school or college or grad school. So that's our e-learning platform. But again, um, but how we've been incorporating or changing group work, incorporating AI into learning, and having our students use it, but not completely rely on it. It's like, well, as a professor, one thing I say is like, yeah, you can use AI as much as you want, um, but you better be right, because AI can a lot of times tell you wrong stuff,
Yeah.
and if you use AI and you submit it, I will punish you, and if it's wrong, and just like basically if a lawyer uses AI in a brief, and
Oh
they're
God,
they're
we've seen
and
those examples.
and they're and they're and they're they're citing cases that are completely hallucinated, you can be disbarred. so so we got the same thing. It's like, yeah, use AI, but don't trust it, because you could be, in some cases
Yeah.
you could be criminally liable if you put something out there that's based on AI, and it's wrong.
With no criminal liability, I live with somebody who is in college right now, and at midnight she's hacking away at a presentation and saying like, "Why I hate building presentations, PowerPoint deck or Google Slide. I can't remember what it was." And me being like, "Oh, I talk to the robots all day sometimes for this and that. Like I have an engineering thing. It's like, can't they put if you have the content in your head." Can't can't you just get the presentation to just pop out? Like I know that they're capable of doing that. And she's like, oh yeah, but they run it through a filter and then they punish you for it. If they can detect that it was built by that. I'm like, oh, well, I kind of think that's a good thing because we're still trying to learn, right? We're running up
Yeah, I
against,
mean,
oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
and what I tell my students is that, using AI is fine, but you do actually have to learn stuff, because in your life, you're going to be sitting in physical meetings with people, and you have to be able to talk intelligently. And so if you know, yeah, you can't just be looking up stuff and having AI help
The
you.
boss says this is the answer.
Yeah. So yeah, you have to be able to make it have an intelligent conversation in real life, and so yeah, AI can't really help you with that.
All right, I think this will segue to probably our last question. We have a ton of other questions. We're not going to be able to get to them all. This is always how we end up. But we'll maybe do future events, Craig, if you're down for it. But I like this conversation this question because it's a little sad. But Faith, who has been very discouraged by some meetings in New York with VCs, basically saying that the money expectations because of AI, or I would say LLM developments, have significantly increased for pre-seed funding. In that, this is a bit of a saucy kind of like modern take. Uh, how do you feel? And when you guys are evaluating companies, like how has it changed? And what kind of advice would you give to companies that are not, basically just AI native companies or AI first companies? So they're in a particular they're a corporate events industry, which is an industry that I imagine is going to persist regardless of, how many, robots we sing to every day to, make our software apps out of the ether. But I have felt this myself, just like a dried up either intense expectations of like, oh, I'm not going to fund your CPG company unless you already show me like 10% month over month growth and like it's an obvious like home run. And or if you're, some companies saying you're building AGI or building the future. How do you guys factor that into your evaluation? And Craig, just for you, like how do you see that industry changing?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, yeah, AI has raised the bar in a lot of ways, but really more specifically in tech, particularly in software, because because AI can be so useful in code development. Yeah, the you're expected to have a much more polished product than you used to have to in a pre-seed world because of that. Now, in something like corporate events, that's always going to be a challenge in funding because of the scalability issue. So, in the because that is an industry that requires a lot of hands-on, and it's not like a software company that can grow infinitely large really quickly. It's like you have to hire people, and so your growth is throttled by the kind of the in-person, or at least the hands-on nature of the business. And so that, industries like that are more difficult for VCs to say yes to fund, because they don't see this like huge fast growth curve that they see in a lot of tech companies. And so that's going to be a challenge. So you're going to have to show some pretty amazing traction to attract VC money in an industry like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think one of our favorite phrases from our pitch competitions is like bold claims require bold evidence. So if your startup is approaching a problem that is so obvious but so huge that everybody can get it instantly, you need to demonstrate. I think one of my favorite examples is social media, teenagers in social media. Oh, it's a problem, right? Like there's a mental health crisis, there's all these kind of things. I've seen hundreds of startups pitch, oh, we're going to fix this. It's like, well, if you're going to fix it, like the only way you can actually get, investor attention is if you demonstrate how you fixed it, in a micro scale. Same
Yeah.
thing with like, your green energy or things like that. It's very hard to sell it just an idea. But Faith, I will I will say she or they said AI has poured rocket fuel on the whole startup business, and it used to be a 20K ARR would get you pre-seed funding, but now it's a million. It is a little bit of that. I do think I don't think it's entirely AI. I do think the champagne and cocaine end at 2021 has changed the fundamentals of how people are evaluating businesses because I think there was still, I think we were riding a decade-long high of businesses built on the idea that if you just get usage, it doesn't matter what your margins are, because your usage will grow infinitely. And I think a lot of investors have found out, I think WeWork is a great example where it's like, oh, the business fundamentals actually didn't make any sense. But, they just had usage, right? They had brand, they had marketing, they had awareness. These things are cycles. So maybe there will be another one. But at the moment, it's 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 pretty brutal out there, in terms of like getting funding. If you can't show numbers, um, it's very difficult to get traction. But we are at the minute mark. Dr. Everett, this was a ton of fun. I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to have you back, to be honest. Maybe we'll do this every year.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to do this again. This has been fun.
And I'm going to throw the link in the chat again. There is no reason why you shouldn't apply to the most fundable companies competition. I think what Dr. Everett has showed is even the application process, and if you get through a couple hurdles, is going to help you look inward on your business and how fundable you are. It doesn't mean your business is not a good business. It just might not be a fundable business. And some non-honest, like the best business is a business that can grow without being funded by outside people. But it can give you a real good insight onto where you're at. And if you do get into it, I know you guys do a phenomenal road show. You guys support the companies for, I don't know, months, if not a year plus, after getting into it. So it's like it's just a really good asset. One of those things where it's like, how do I increase my network? How do I find new customers? How do I find new investors? Programs like this are absolutely the way to do that.
All true.
Excellent. So thank you, Dr. Everett. Uh,
Thank you.
have a great rest of your day, and we will see y'all soon.